In this tutorial I'm going to go over airport data on the VFR terminal and sectional area charts. We can see that there's a lot of information here, but if we take the time to go through it methodically, most of it should be fairly intuitive. Looking at a top-down approach, we've got the flight service station on the top, no special VFR below that. Here we've got the name of the airport, and if there's a box around it, it means that there's special air traffic rules and airport traffic patterns. So look at the airport facility directory. Then in parentheses we'll have the airport identifier, which could be also the ICAO identifier. And let's say we've got Los Angeles International Airport as the name, then we'll have LAX in the parentheses for the identifier. Here we've got the frequency for the control tower, and if there's a star, it means that the tower closes after a certain time. You can find those times listed in the sectional chart, and I'll have another tutorial on that later. And once the tower is closed, you need to know what the common traffic advisory frequency is, and that's indicated by the blue circle with the C, which means that the tower frequency becomes the CTAF. There could also be an R by the name, which means that there's airport surveillance radar. Here we've got the ADIS, and it could be the ASOS or AWOS frequency in place of ADIS. Here we've got the elevation of the airport in feet, and that's measured at the highest point of any usable runway. L for runway lighting. If there's a star with the L, it means that there's limitations on the lighting, and you should look at the airport facility directory. The length of the runway to the nearest 100th foot, and they calculate the nearest 100 foot not dividing by 100 but by dividing by 70. So if the airport runway length is 8,070 feet, the number will be 81. But if the runway length is 8,069 feet, it won't divide into 70 and it will be an 80. So that's just a little piece of information to keep in mind. The only frequency that will be the most obscure to you ever on here is the Unicom, because it doesn't tell you it's the Unicom. Everything else tells you what it is. Control tower, ADIS, VFR advisory, which by the way this is the VFR advisory frequency if you didn't notice already. So that's the only piece of information that you don't know, but it should be fairly common that this is the Unicom. Here we've got RP for right pattern for runways 2 tree and tree 4. And very bottom we've got the airport of entry. So those are all the pieces. Most of them are very intuitive. 2 little cautionary notes. Right pattern is a special pattern. If it's not listed as RP and just 2 tree and tree 4, that means that they are left-hand pattern, and that's because the pilot sits on the left seat. If you're making left turns, you get a nice view of the airport when you're making your turns. Also, pattern altitude is not always 1,000 feet plus the airport elevation. There are untowered airports that have pattern altitudes that are different from 1,000 feet plus the airport elevation, so just be careful about that. And if we look here at the bottom, it says when information is lacking, the respective character is replaced by a dash. Lighting codes refer to runway edge lights and may not represent the longest runway or full-length lighting. So now we're going to bounce to Washington Dulles International. So here's the name, the ICAO identifier, IAD. Control tower, 1, 2, 3 different control tower frequencies depending on what runway you're coming in on. ADIS is over here. Elevation of the airport, lighted 11,500 feet, and the Unicom. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't tell you the ground frequency anywhere, or I should say ground frequencies, because there might be different ground controllers. So it also doesn't tell you what the departure control frequency is. All that information is in the airport facility directory. You want to make sure you really do your pre-flight planning on the ground, get all this information so that when you're in the air, you're coming into land, you know what frequencies you're going to be handed off to, and everything goes nice and smoothly for you. And it'll keep the chatter on the radio down to a minimum and your professionalism as a pilot at its highest level. So that's all there is to it, and it's really that simple.